There are so many of you here. I'm psyched. Wow, hi, I'm Kim Kester, and I'm going to be giving a presentation called Sex on PrEP. And this comes from qualitative findings from the iPrEx open label extension study in our US sites. So, the data that I'm presenting are set in the context of the iPrEx studies. First of which was the iPrEx randomized control trial, which was a phase 3 safety and efficacy study of once daily oral PrEP for men who have sex with men and transgender women. The trial enrolled just under 2,500 participants across 6 continents, and the results of that study showed that the use of Truvada as PrEP was highly efficacious when taken as directed. That study closed in January 2011, and a few months later, the iPrEx open label extension study began, otherwise known as OLE. So OLE is a continuation of the iPrEx study, and participants who were enrolled in the randomized phase were invited to come over onto the OLE study, and if you're positive, it didn't matter. Everyone was invited to either take drug or not take drug. And really the intent of OLE was to provide additional information about the safety of PrEP as well as behavior of people taking PrEP over the longer term. So we built our qualitative sub-study into the OLE sites in the United States. We have 3 sites in the US. They're located in Boston and Chicago and in my backyard in San Francisco. So among the numerous concerns that have emerged since the publication of the various PrEP study results, including the iPrEx results, is that of risk compensation. That concept meaning, will the protective benefits of PrEP be offset by increased risks taken by people who use PrEP? So in 2010, in the seminal paper on the iPrEx study, there was no risk compensation reported, and those findings were based on self-reported data. More recently, in 2013, my colleagues published an article, again using the iPrEx randomized phase data, and published in PLOS One, and again found no evidence of risk compensation, this time using data from the biological markers. So like many others, we just were curious about what's happening in terms of sexual practices as a result of PrEP. So the goal of this presentation is to shed light on how PrEP use has impacted and influenced sex practices among PrEP users. So we did a series of open-ended, in-depth interviews with a subset of the iPrEx OLE participants. We did interview both folks who had opted not to go on PrEP as well as those who wanted PrEP, and we talked to them about things like what was motivating them to take or not take PrEP, meaning and experience with taking PrEP, and we asked them about their adherence support preferences, among other things. I'm going to focus on the data coming out of the meaning and experience with PrEP taking. We audio recorded these and transcribed them verbatim. We've done a number of different analyses, and including this one, a thematic analysis is conducted. So we were wanting to talk to about 20 guys. These are all men. There aren't any transgender women in this sample, unfortunately. So 60 in-depth interviews were conducted between April and September 2012, and it was about a year into the OLE study, and it spanned the time period just before and just after FDA approval of Truvada in the US. We were aiming for about 20 in each site, which we approximated. The mean age of our folks was 36 years, and majority were white, but not by much, 43% black, 6% other. I have names for the quotes associated with the quotes I'll read to you. Those names are fictitious. I just want to make sure to say that. Okay, so sex practices before and after taking PrEP, these are really just the main findings that I want to share with you today. First, we need to know what's going on with our participants, what they were up to in terms of sex practices prior to taking PrEP. And condom use ranged from routine use to episodic use to no use at all. Certainly there were lots of additional harm reduction strategies that were in place, but the field is really quite fixated on using condom use as a measure of risk compensation, and that's why I presented that to you. But once on PrEP, the majority did not report significant sexual behavior changes, and we had really one exception, and that was among the youth in our sample. Chicago enrolled, they focused on young men of color between the ages of 18 and 29. These folks were the ones who actually increased their condom usage, so that they did make significant behavior changes, and we attribute that to the counseling that they received during the OLE study. We have terrible sex education in the United States, just as a side note. So that was the one really significant change we did see. Otherwise, PrEP use in most cases did not lead to increased condomless sex. And I'm just reflecting back what the literature I mentioned earlier is stating. But what it did lead to was decreased stress, guilt, and fear. And I just want to note that these discussions that we had with guys around PrEP, their PrEP use, and the meaning of PrEP were clearly they're embedded in their own sexual values around condom use and non-condom use. So those who valued sex without a condom, PrEP then became a way to decrease any future negative sexual health consequences. And others who really valued having sex with condoms, PrEP use for them and the previous group led to greater feelings of safety and empowerment and diminished feelings of worry. So I want to present the data related to one of the most pervasive narratives in our interviews, and that is PrEP use and its ability to neutralize fear. So our participants discussed a tension between the feelings of fear and feelings of safety as it related to connecting sexually and emotionally with other men. I'm going to read you a quote from someone that I call Daryl. He's a 51-year-old African-American man who said, "The HIV anxiety is gone. At the beginning of the interview, I said HIV scared me. Even when I was being safe, it scared me. I don't want to say it doesn't scare me, but I think it scares me less now, if that makes any sense. There's a certain amount of comfort that comes from knowing that I'm taking this regularly. So in general, the HIV anxiety is gone. I won't say it's gone, but it's not in the front of my head as it used to be, where I was obsessively worried about it while sex was happening." So really more than anything, we heard these recurring narratives, and that's something that the next participant, Seth, he really pinpointed as this quote-unquote background stress and how PrEP alleviated that stress. And importantly, in the interviews, men spontaneously offered that reducing stress, the stress possibly related to potentially becoming infected with HIV, did not necessarily open the door to behavioral changes in one's sex life. And I'll share with you a quote from Seth to illustrate that. So first, using PrEP provides a respite from the ongoing underlying threat of HIV. And Seth, 29-year-old guy, he said, "I don't have the background stress that I did before, and that's about it. It's not like I'm going out and being like, ooh, bareback now, I'm protected, it's fine. It's so not the case. I just didn't have the overwhelming stress and fear and guilt that I would have had before." So PrEP use seems to take away the worry, but not the condom in many cases. Or condoms weren't at play anyway, and so PrEP is now providing even greater protection for those who are already having condomless sex, as in the next case of someone I call Charles, 21-year-old. He said, "I don't know what I would do without that pill. I would probably have HIV right now, because I used to have sex unprotected like I told you before the pill. I probably could be dead right now. The pill was a blessing to me." So there are a few studies looking at really investigating men's intention around condom use in the context of PrEP. And in particular, I'm just going to cite one paper from Sarit Golub's study. She showed that 35% of the men she surveyed thought that they would give up condoms in the context of PrEP. And a couple of quotes from our participants that somewhat reflected this intention that they had prior to going on PrEP. And so I'm calling it this theoretical desire. So participants expressed a theoretical desire for increased sexual adventure, but it didn't actually play out in reality. First quote is, "The funny thing is, I wanted to let myself be a little more open to doing something while taking somebody home, and it didn't happen. We ended up having safe sex anyway." Next guy said, "I thought this was going to have a bigger effect on the way I had sex than it has. I kind of just didn't change my habits very much, except just feeling a little less worried." So during the interviews, we learned that PrEP has created a space for men to voice the really deeply felt fears associated with becoming infected with HIV, and for many, PrEP has become an antidote to those fears. And so in our findings, just to review the bullets, first, PrEP seems to be additive or supplemental. It's not a replacement to condoms. I feel like there's a lot of emphasis on risk compensation, and it's overshadowing what I, in my opinion, I feel like we need a better, more realistic understanding of the protective benefits of PrEP. And specifically, our plan is to really remain curious about and identify ways and look at the ways that PrEP is unfolding in men's lives. And we'll be looking at the individual level, interpersonal level, and the social level. We have phenomenal participants in this study, and I'm eternally grateful to them, and also to my co-authors. Thank you so much. Some of you are here. I want to just close by saying that this presentation is dedicated to someone that some of us in this room are very close to and love dearly, and that is our friend Jeff McConnell. He's a long-term AIDS survivor, really a fierce advocate for PrEP and for making sexual intimacy safer. So here's to you, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think we have a few minutes to take a couple of questions. Yeah, please.
What do you think? How much are these results impacted by the fact that people get PrEP within open label trial, so they don't have to pay for it? Would it be different in a real world setting where people have to pay for the drug?
I think it's a good question. I would surmise, just guess, that if you're paying for it, then you feel like you're in some way in need of it, and I don't actually know what that means, whether it's you're in need of it because you're really afraid of contracting HIV, or if it's because you have a lot of different sex partners and you're not using condoms anyway. I can't really say.
Peace.
It's an open question.
Hi, I'm Jamie from Vancouver. Thank you very much. That was really great. My question, I'm still trying to wrap my head around this idea of risk compensation and if there is a better measure than consistent condom use while on PrEP. To me, it seems like, at least for me as a single individual, the reason for taking PrEP would be to not use condoms. Why would somebody use condoms consistently and take a pill every day? I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. So if you have some ideas around what is the better measure for risk compensation there, and then follow up to that, what do you think is the social desirability bias that you might be seeing in these results that you shared?
Sure. So we could talk for a very long time about the stories that I've heard about the meaning of sex and where condoms enter the room and when they don't. And I think it's a little simplistic to assume that because one is taking PrEP, they're fully protected from HIV, that condoms are just going to fall by the wayside. I actually think men very strategically deploy condoms now, and they will probably continue to in the future, and that's based on my talking with these folks in iPrEx OLE, early adopters of this highly efficacious treatment. In terms of measuring risk compensation differently, I am no risk compensation expert by any means, but I'm not sure what risk compensation actually should look like. It needs to be redefined in the context of PrEP. It's my opinion.
Okay, let's take one more question.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. Dan Escudero from the U.S. I know that there are a lot of concerns regarding real-world settings and possibly having lower adherence than in trial settings. I know that a lot of the trials were really able to probably increase adherence over what it might have been in other settings. But now that we actually know that PrEP works, if you take it often, are you seeing possibly increased levels of adherence, or have you actually asked any particular questions about adherence, whether or not they're more willing to take it every day now that we know it works?
It is a great question. It's still an outstanding question. At the time that we were doing these interviews, we didn't really have the data on how many pills per week were necessary to have really great rates of protection. And so everyone in the open label extension study was advised to take the pill every day. I wish I could answer it, but I don't. I can't. Certainly not based on these data.
So this will be very brief, okay? And the last one.
So condom must prevent also other infections, not only HIV, so this must be a factor as well for keeping condom. Not living in isolation of HIV.
Sure. There was not a lot of discussion of sexually transmitted infections, not a lot of concern about sexually transmitted infections among the men that I was talking with. It's something that they can cope with.
Okay, thanks, Kim.